Teachers and boards of trustees were welcomed onto the Huiturangi Ora Marae in Hamilton for the start of a 4-day study of the draft Maori Pastoral Care Plan. The course was aimed at an examination of Maori spirituality and the history of the people. Participants were led through the Pastoral Care Plan and later developed strategies for implementing it into their programs.
I think you'll be very surprised just what is going on in the ministry and what they hope to achieve. Some of you are probably more aware than others. I've been a little lucky in that from time to time I meet up with Waimata to go down to Wellington to some meetings down there and then find out what is actually going on. Sometimes you hear the minister making certain announcements, and quite often those announcements do not appeal to the teachers at large, particularly people at the chalk face level. And also it appears it doesn't also appeal even to boards of trustees. It also appears it doesn't appeal. I'm starting to work out just who does it appeal to whenever he makes a statement. So one becomes sane when one hears what the machinery is doing. And Roimata is definitely part of that machinery in terms of being a person who is working in the policy division. So any announcements that are generally made by the minister in terms of Maori developments in education, Roimata has the responsibility of conveying that on behalf of the Maori perspectives in education. And she keeps in touch with people and also the committees set up by the minister, by other national Maori groups who feed into Roimata, and she has a big responsibility on her hands to ensure that what Maori people perceive is indeed the way the minister should relay them back to the country. And I think you're going to find her talk quite interesting in that, while it is one of ministerial approvals as such, it is also one which we in Catholic schools have also got to address. Whether we're dealing with the Maori question or not, we have still got to address it. I think you'll find her talk.
Kia ora no tātou. Kia ora. Te mea tūtahi māku I tēnei wā, me huri aku whakaaro ki ngā tikanga e pāna kia ngai tāu te iwi Māori. Me mihi atu ki a koe te pihopa e noho mai rā, tēnā koe. Ki a koe pā. Tēnā koe Raimata. He nui ngā whakaaro kei roti ahau I tēnei wā, o tēnei wā hei. Arā o kōrero mo taku pāpā I noho ani konei. Mo te tipu aku o taku whānau I tēnei wāhi. Engari, hei aha tēnā mo tēnei wā. Kia koutou katoa ko haramai ki tēnei hui. Koe nā te take I whakaingoa te ahau ko Roimata. Tēnā koutou mo tēnei honore, te haramai ki te kōrero ki a koutou, ki te whakamārama ki a koutou, heha ngā whakaaro, heha ngā whakahairetanga, heha ngā kaupapa o te tāhuhu o te mātauranga, e pāna ki tēnei te mārautanga. Tēnā koe mo tono mai ki au a Taubi, ki haramai. Pai ana ki au te puta mai I tērā wāhanga, I tērā wāhi o te whare o te tāhuhu o te mātauranga, ki te whakamārama atu ki ngā tāngata. No te mena kare koutou I waho e mōhio ana ki ngā kaupapa ko whakatakotoria I roto I ngā wāhi pēnā I te tāhuhu o te mātauranga, he maumau noiho te utu I ahau te mahi I reira. So, after that, I was saying thank you very much, and greetings to you, Bishop, and to Father Tate. We go back a long way. But when I was quite young, my father was the doctor here for about 20 years, and we were, well, he was, not me, involved in lots of the early things that led to, I guess in some way, it was a catalyst to what's happened now in Tainui in terms of coming to terms with their own rangatiratanga. Kirikiriroa marae, we walked up and down Kirikiriroa long before there was a Kirikiriroa and all the fights were going on. I wouldn't say fights, but let's say long discussions with the council about Kirikiriroa and accessing that land and where that marae was actually going to fit on that site, and a lot of time spent out at Raglan with Eva planning what was going to happen in getting that golf course back. So we have, you know, I have lots of sort of family memories about this place, but I had to share them. So what I'm going to do, I hope that won't be on this thing, will it? You'll edit all that, won't you? Okay, now what I want to do is talk about what happens in the Ministry of Education as far as my role is concerned. I work in the policy division, which deals with the development of curriculum statements and the writing of a curriculum framework for what should be taught in all New Zealand schools. And that has implications for all schools. It doesn't matter whether you're an integrated school, a primary school, a secondary school, a private school, or whatever. And it's our responsibility, and it's one of the few things I think that the ministry still has a responsibility for, and that's to define the curriculum for New Zealand schools. And we don't say what it is you have to learn in detail, but we define the framework or the parameters of what should be learnt in the curriculum. So what I want to do first of all is look at the big picture of the curriculum framework of New Zealand and look at the ministry's role, and then talk about where the ministry's role stops in developing the curriculum, and mention the New Zealand Qualifications Authority's responsibility in this whole big picture for senior secondary school, and then switch on to looking at the development of those individual curriculum statements, you know, for English, maths, science, technology, and the implications of all this for changing things for the Māori learner, and looking at ways of validating Māori knowledge within each of those curriculum areas, because that is one of the changes that have actually happened within that new curriculum statement, that the recognition of there is Māori specific knowledge that has a place in New Zealand society, and it has great implications for the development of new programs for teachers. And I know that these have come at a time when the resources haven't been put in place, but this New Zealand curriculum framework is to sit there hopefully for the next 10 to 15 years. And if that's the case, what we're doing is putting down a blueprint for future education for the next, say, 15 years. So lots of developments should arise out of this, which should have some positive impact for Māori learners as well as New Zealand society, if people are, teachers and educators are to take it all seriously. Now, when the Labour government, or national government, came into power, it had three initiatives in its manifesto relating to the curriculum or to that whole area of learning and assessment. And so what I wanted to do is point out what these are. Got a pencil there, Toby? Easier. I just want to use it as a pointer. Okay. And these three initiatives were looking at the curriculum, what is being taught in New Zealand schools, or looking at whether it's appropriate for the 20th century or for the new New Zealand. Assessment, the way in which we assessed what happens in our schools, is it still appropriate, or whether that should be reshaped. And qualifications, a lot of our qualifications are very ad hoc, and there is no continuity in what kids can do. Things you do at primary, things you do in the fifth form, and the work you might do in an apprenticeship, you can't actually accredit them to one particular certificate. So this was another issue that had to be looked at. Okay, now who's responsible for what in terms of these three initiatives? Well, the Ministry of Education is responsible for the development of the New Zealand Curriculum Framework and the National Curriculum Statements. These are new curriculum statements for each of the subjects like English, Maths, Science, Technology, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Now, the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, or as some people was calling it, was NESQA, but we've got to move away from that and call it the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, is responsible for the qualifications and standards. So that has impact, if you're a secondary school teacher, on what happens from the 5th, 6th, 7th form up. So if you are working in the senior secondary school area, you might want to, if you don't have much information about that, you might want to pursue that on your own to find out from the representatives from there what are the implications, because I can't talk a lot about what happens for the National New Zealand Qualifications Authority. They have their own speakers. I can give you a general outline. Okay, so what is the New Zealand Curriculum Framework and the National Curriculum Statements? What are these things? Well, they provide the official policy for learning, for teaching, and assessment in schools. It's, as I said, one thing that is still centrally devised or prepared. Most other things are left to individual schools to manage everything else for themselves, to take over the total management of these schools. Now, what does this New Zealand Curriculum Framework look like? This is it's called the Framework for the National Curriculum of New Zealand. And what it does, as I said, sets out learning and assessment, and it sets out what in fact should happen in schools. It doesn't tell you what you should do in your individual schools, but it sets out the parameters or the boundaries of what New Zealand schooling is all about. It has a set of principles which underpin why we have schools in New Zealand and what our education system is all about. And one of the things that I want to just raise at this stage is that one of these principles is the importance of Māori as tangata whenua, and the responsibilities of schools to provide for Māori children, if it means providing Māori language as an option for parents, that is to be recognised as a viable or an important principle in the education of New Zealand. It provides for, as we'll see later on, the opportunity for Māori children to learn or to access the curriculum through their own language. And so it provides the principle or the basis for the development of total immersion classes, kura kaupapa Māori, because they are now considered to be part of a state education system. And so it's the ministry's role to provide high quality opportunities for parents who want that. There is also a statement that talks about the importance of Māori knowledge in relation to all areas of learning for everybody. So that has implications for all learning areas. And if you are not teaching Māori as a subject or teaching through Māori language, it has implications for what you do in terms of your own subject areas. So first of all, we have these principles, and that underpins the curriculum. We have, once upon a time we used to talk about subjects. We had key subjects in schools. Well, now we're trying to move away from the word subject, well, we have moved away from that, and we talk about essential learning areas, because in many schools, people in primary schools in particular, you don't learn subjects as such. What you learn is more integrated, and so one or two subjects might dovetail into each other, whereas in secondary school the emphasis tends to be more on subjects. So that's why we've changed the use of those words and talk about essential learning areas. They are the things that the learning areas that we think are critical for our children, and this covers all learning from new entrants through to the end of compulsory schooling. So this curriculum, the framework for the national curriculum, is responsible for defining the parameters of our education from new entrant up to the 7th form. We also have, and if you want to, as I said, what are these essential learning areas? These things that we all recognise now. Language. Now, once upon a time, we never used to write language. We used to talk about English, because English was considered the norm and the only subject that was of importance or consequence in New Zealand education. But this has changed now because, as I said, language is a generic term that covers a range of different languages. We now have the curriculum delivered through English and delivered through Māori. And in the near future, we might even have the curriculum delivered through other mother tongues, because we've got greater number of non-Māori coming to New Zealand, non-European or non-English speaking people coming into New Zealand, that the implications are, you know, pretty big. Mathematics. Well, we all understand mathematics. Science and environment, technology, the arts, social sciences, physical and personal development. Now, if we take those essential learning areas, we think back to what I said before about the importance of looking at two perspectives of the world in which New Zealand children grow up in. That there's Māori-specific knowledge in relation to mathematics, which could be incorporated into programs that are for children. There are different ways of looking at the world in terms of science, and that's really important. So if you are a science teacher, or if you are teaching science programs to children, and if you have a copy of that national curriculum draft science statements, you'll see there are some examples, Māori examples, of different things you can do in science. Now, you don't have to use those particular ones in those books, but you've got to start trying to broaden your horizon to see that their science isn't just a pure, well, there's a lot of debate about what science is, but there's a recognition in the national curriculum that Māori knowledge is important even in these particular areas of learning. Technology will be the same, although technology hasn't been defined. There are lots of examples of Māori technology which may not be used all the time now, but in fact played a critical part in the establishment of Māori in this country. And there are still aspects of Māori technology which have a place in today's contemporary world, and they're the kinds of things that teachers are going to have to find out. And as we develop the new curriculum statements, we'll be finding examples of these to put into them, so to give teachers examples of Māori technology that's applicable to the 20th century as well as in a traditional role. The area of arts. Well, once again, I can't talk about the huge range of things that are also Māori focused that have a place in there. Social sciences, values and attitudes, which come under the heading of social sciences. Once again, the relationship of people, I think for a lot of us, Iri Hapati's talk yesterday might have been the first time that we've had to actually look at our relationship and look at why people have got to where they're at, based on a set of information that really has never been provided by our education system. And it's one of the contentious areas that we're trying to, in the curriculum say that it's important for every New Zealand child to grow up understanding why it is we carry the things we carry in our heads today. What are they based on? Are they based on information, or they are based on non-information? If the choices and decisions that we make about others are based on non-information, we are heading for trouble, fast. And I think every one of us, it doesn't matter whether it's me working in my job in the ministry, because I have a role to try and help shape these in relation to putting down and writing things that I think, and which reflects what a lot of other people think, key elements that will shape the direction that we want our country to be by the year 2000. But it's only a document, and it's only a piece of paper, and it's the teachers who make it work or who don't make it work. And that's why I think these statements are no use unless teachers can understand and take them on board to do something in shaping them and turning them into practical realities with their students. The physical and personal development. Once again, we look at the whole issue of different ways of looking at our bodies, and they're all as important, because they all the outcome of all this is to be a healthier person. But it is to recognise that there's more than one way of delivering something. And the hardest part is to accept that there is another way that might be as viable. One of the other important things in this curriculum framework is to look at essential skills. Now, you might read in the paper all the time that there's a lot of criticism about the level of skills that New Zealand kids leave school with. We're being told that we can't cope with the 20th century economy. We don't have, we don't have marketable skills. And that's the reason why we are all unemployed, or we can't get a job, or we can't do this and we can't do that. Now, we know for a fact that's not necessarily true, but there is also an acceptance of the fact that we actually have to look seriously at the kinds of skills that we want our children to leave school with. And so all the kinds of documents and statements that were written up until now talked about communicating only in one way. Now, we've shifted this in this new curriculum framework that'll be coming out to schools to say that all New Zealand children should be able to learn to communicate in bicultural situations. That means to say that we shouldn't have children in another generation going to a marae or going into a Māori situation, not understanding where it's all coming from. We shouldn't expect that of our children in the next generation. Not that we expect them to be able to understand everything that's happening and understand all the words, because that would be asking a lot. But children should be able to feel comfortable to go with another person, a Māori child, to a marae or some other area without wondering what on earth is going on. And so what we are wanting to see is the expression of being able to communicate in bicultural situations. And let's say if it's not a Māori situation, although we're talking here specifically about a Māori situation, you might have children of large groups of Pacific Island children in your school, and you might want to look at the reality of that community and being able to communicate comfortably in two particular environments. Numeracy skills. Well, if you're a teacher, I don't have to go on and talk about that, the whole range of numeracy skills that are expected of our kids. Information handling skills. Now, this is changing because information changes, doesn't it? I mean, I remember the time when I watched a Sputnik go over when I was a kid, and I thought that was the beginning and the end of everything. But, I mean, kids these days take a Sputnik, they say, what is that? They don't even know what a Sputnik is. I mean, and that's information, isn't it? So what we've got to do is teach our kids to handle information, not necessarily to to learn everything, but how do they take what they want for that particular time in their career or their schooling or their learning and find ways of teaching them to access information, not just to worry about the content of something, but how do we teach children to go and use a library, to access things where we thought before it wasn't possible for them to do. Problem solving and decision making skills. Now this is critical too, because people have different ways of solving problems. Primary school teachers have more of a group approach to teaching children, and so children have integrated learning problems and they work together in groups to solve problems, or they might work as an individual at times, but they have a whole different ways of looking at solving problems. Secondary schools have a different, what appears to me, there's a tension there because children tend to be put in classes other than maybe science classes, or you know, you can cry me down here, but I was a secondary school teacher too, and that the whole issue of giving children the freedom and flexibility to try and find out things for themselves and put them into groups to learn isn't quite happening in many areas of our secondary schooling, because we do tend to sit our kids down and think we've got X amount of information that they've got to get stuck in their heads by a certain time, and it's all driven by a particular exam at the end of the year, and this has implications particularly at the senior levels about what we teach our children, without realising perhaps that our kids can learn that same sort of information but in different ways. Now at universities, there are instances where people are doing their stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 master's classes in groups. Instead of just one individual having to put themselves or produce a bit of work on their own, they're starting to look at groups collectively putting together some kind of project where each person has a responsibility to that group. And so who gets the mana and status out the end is the group. But the individual has an important role to play. And that's a very Māori way of operating. That in fact, that it's the group, it's the contribution of the individual to the group and its success that works very well for Māori learners and also for many Pākehā learners. So it's although this is not my, you know, I'm just talking about different ways of doing things and different approaches to facilitating kids' learning that we as teachers have got to be looking at. Self-management skills. Well, once again, it's the same issue that for a long, long time, particularly in secondary schools, I think, we didn't give children the, you know, we don't recognise their ability to manage things for themselves. I think we're locked into the whole issue of giving them X amount of stuff and you sit down and you do it. And in many instances, we still have letters from parents who talk about children still having to copy things off boards or copy things out of a book, copy down a chapter. I mean, those days of learning should be gone and out the window if we're looking at what is our role as an educator. We should be facilitating children wanting to learn. We should be wanting to find the little seed inside their little minds and tip the fertilizer on it and get it to flourish rather than controlling it, because if it blooms, it'll bloom. You might have 6 things all in a row, but they won't be exactly the same. They might be the same colour, but they'll all be slightly different when they bloom. And that's the same with children, because no 2 children are alike. And I suppose it's, as I say, changing our philosophy about what it is to educate kids. Social skills, work and study skills. All these, the emphasis on work and study skills has become more important because of the whole issue of changing the way in which our country, the philosophical base for our country. I'm not saying I agree with that, but I'm saying that the emphasis for work and study skills have taken more importance now in our society and being emphasised more strongly in this curriculum framework than it did before.
Roimata Kirikiri continues her address on this tape.
The Minister has developed this achievement initiative, and that's looking at our curriculum statements and trying to reshape our curriculum statements, because we're supposed to be able to, by doing this, provide better learning outcomes, or stating clearer learning outcomes for kids in schools. How do we do that? We'll be doing that by looking at assessment. How do we assess children at primary school, at secondary school? And then what happens when we find out if kids aren't succeeding? Well, there's a pool of money which has been used for special needs money and resource, equity funding. And we're trying to find ways of using this money to support the children who are not keeping up with their learning in this area, rather than just, the Minister thinks that there is a way of possibly taking the money and targeting it to individual needs of children within the school. Now that's children who may not be succeeding as well as children who might be excelling. So the Ministry's got that responsibility of looking at ways in which this can happen to support that. Okay, so what on earth does this all mean for you? I was talking about the development of these new curriculum statements like English, maths, science, and possibly technology as the first of the learning areas that the Minister has said he wanted to be reshaped. Okay, he wanted to have clearly identified learning outcomes at each level of schooling. So that means to say, if you have, we have identified eight levels of schooling from primary school right through to secondary school, and I'll show you over here what this is. Now each subject area like maths, English, science, technology, Māori language, which we're going to be starting work on and I'll talk about to you later, it'll be geography, history, it'll end up the whole curriculum, will be divided up into 8 levels. And each one of these levels equates with approximately 2 classes at school. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it won't matter what the subject is, but we should be able to define what we expect our children to be able to do or know at level 1 of schooling, at level 2, at level 3, at level 4, at level 5, 6, 7, and 8. When we come to levels 6, 7, and 8, then the New Zealand Qualifications Authority has the role of looking at the qualifications and unit standards, and the Ministry doesn't have a role in doing any of that. So our role in the Ministry is to look at each of the subject areas like maths, English, science, technology, Māori language, and look at what the expectations are for children to be able to do at each of those levels of schooling. Now, how do we do this? Well, we don't sit down in there on our own and start writing a statement. Our job in the Ministry is just to facilitate the development. So I'll give you an example of the maths document that's just, or the science document which has gone out to schools. There was a person in the Ministry whose job it was to take that, to head up a project team. He had to advertise for registrations of interest to develop that document, and people from colleges of education and different teachers applied to be the coordinator of that development. Now that coordinator that was appointed was responsible for setting up a writing team, and we specify that on that writing team that there have to be Māori writers. And each of these developments, there have to be Māori people involved in writing, whether it's for English, for technology, for anything else. The Minister has a policy advisory group, and on that policy advisory group, once again, we ensure that there are Māori names there for him to select, Māori names, people who've got credibility in terms of Māori people out in the community. So we're not just getting somebody who's going to sit there and not say anything and just rubber stamp without questioning the validity of what is happening. So each of those writers with the coordinator then goes and works with teachers. They are teachers anyway. They're all practicing teachers who are responsible for writing these statements, and they cover the whole range of schooling. Each one of the science writers had to have another reference group. Now, there was a Māori person from Waikato University, Liz McKinley, was on the writing group for the science subject, and so she had another reference team of people here in Waikato that she had to meet with regularly to make sure the sorts of things that she was talking about in relation to science and Māori knowledge, which was to apply across the curriculum, was being validated by that particular group of her reference group. And so we're hoping to follow the same process in the development of all these statements to show you that there is, a real effort by the ministry to say that there is a place for Māori knowledge in each of our learning areas or subject areas that we're talking about. What is going to happen though, and probably for teachers it'll be difficult, is the implementation of that, or using those curriculum statements to, and finding the resource people to help you put these things into practice. Because this is only the statement, it is not the provision of resources at this stage. So there are lots of issues there for teachers who are going to take this seriously or just ignore it. The ministry can't whoop you with a big stick and say you can or you can't. That's our role, is just to put the thing together. I suppose the best people are the communities themselves. So your own school communities will be concerned about what you are doing or what you're not doing. The ministry doesn't have a role in that. Are there any questions you want to ask? Hi.
Just stating the obvious, I suppose, but as we hear from integrated schools, religious education is of primary importance. It's the key to our special character. And I think one of the things that is kind of painful is that always when we see this, notwithstanding that we were consulted the first way around, and I know I wrote in as a humanity or as an art, religion studies and so forth, but I mean, it is such a secular system. The framework and the philosophy, the kaupapa, is very secular, the way it's presented. And I think it's really sad because, okay, we can eventually apply to have our religion studies or our religious education perhaps as one of the learning modules and so on, but, it's a huge hurdle because we want to integrate our spirituality through everything too. I mean, Māori...
Well, I don't think there's nothing that stops you, because you see, this is just a framework for the key, identifying the key areas of learning in key skills. There is nothing to stop you in a Catholic school or in an integrated school still doing the things that you consider important in terms of your religious aspect or character.
In the learning key things, there's nothing there about values, about spirituality.
Well, hopefully that we will, we've raised them as issues to be discussed, because when the draft submissions came back from 2,000 schools, I mean, that's fascinating. So many people there, 2,700 schools in New Zealand, we got 2,000 responses. So that shows you that people do care about what we teach in our schools. And the issue of spirituality and values were raised as being missing from that document, and they were one of the concerns that were then put in an issues paper that has gone to the Minister. And so we're waiting, because he's got it at the moment, and I can't say to you whether it'll still be there or next week or not, but it is an issue that has been raised about the secular nature, because people talk about education as being secular. you know, not having any religious connotation, whereas we know for integrated schools, for kura kaupapa Māori, for a range of schools, that is important to the nature of delivering the curriculum. And so we hope that, well, cross our fingers.
May I say something about that, Dr. Was it at the Hui on the National Curriculum Framework that perhaps I last saw you, and this was raised quite strongly, not just by myself, but I was pleased to see actually one of the teachers' unions moving into the area of values and so forth, and spirituality did come into it, and there is a certain reluctance there, as there always has been, because it is a secular-based system. But I was encouraged because the distinct impression I got there after working in the state system in New Zealand for many years before I moved into the Catholic system, I detect a shift. And I think one of the causes of this shift has been the Maori Renaissance, which has obliged people to because they want to receive and accept and promote Taha Māori and Tikanga Māori, they have to recognise and accept the Wairua, the spirituality. And this has caused a real dilemma for many people in the secular system. How can they accept you know, Taha Māori and promote it and believe in it, and Te Reo Māori, and yet neglect this aspect of it? And it's making them look again at their own culture and their own education. And I think bit by bit, I won't say there's a breaking down of the secular thing, but there's an acceptance and an acknowledgement that spirituality, however you might define it at this stage, has got a part to play in the system, the whole national system of education in New Zealand. And I believe this is an opportunity now, this big change we're coming about, to continually promote that. So I hope that the ministry is going to take it on board.
You see, and this framework that I was showing, as I said, is really outlining the parameters. It says clearly that this thing is flexible. It doesn't say you have to do this, that, and the other thing. You have your own local needs, or you have your own character, and so that should be seen to be part of your way of delivering the curriculum. So I don't know whether the words have got strong enough to say in black and white, wairua and spirituality is the key to an individual's development or whatever, but I know that is there anyway. So that allows for those things that you're talking about to still, you know, not be considered to be outside, because that's part of your character.
It'd be good to see it named. It would be
Well, I know. Well, that's what we're waiting to see.
The same thing has happened in the science and mathematics initiatives, the draft, and there doesn't seem to be any Māori input there at all.
In
The initiatives, the science.
statement in Te Reo Māori. Now this is really critical, because we're having, at the moment, we've got children coming through schools who are learning totally in Māori. They're coming through kohanga reo, and Māori is becoming their first language. Although they mightn't be still fluent speakers, but Māori is still their language of communication in the kohanga reo and in some instances at home. So this has put all sorts of, it has lots of questions that are going to be raised about the place of Māori language and understanding what children can do and what children can't do. Because in many instances, in let's say many schools, Māori is taught as a subject. Is Māori taught only in a subject in your environments? Right, so teaching Māori as a subject now becomes like teaching ESL. I'm not saying that, but I mean it has those kinds of implications, because when you look at what a child can say by the time they're 5, if they've grown up like speaking English or speaking Māori, it's quite phenomenal, isn't it? And you take that in relation to a child who's learning how to speak English or Māori at the age of 5, there are a whole lot of different issues about the level of language that's being used. Me in the ministry, my job will be just to facilitate this. We'll be getting people who are linguists, as well as people who are practicing teachers, to look at what are our expectations of our kids who have come from kohanga reo, who have been at school who are in that range of classes, and what sorts of things should they be able to say, start to shape in terms of writing, and be able to see visually and describe and whatever else it is that Māori-speaking teachers think are important for our children to be able to do. So this is happening in the same way as it's happening for English. Now this raises, people have been saying to me, well, this has lots of implications for me as a teacher in a school where I'm teaching Māori as a subject, because I'm teaching it as a subject, and I'm saying, well, we're saying, well, look, really, we shouldn't see it as an issue because we're doing two different things, aren't we? What we can do is use this, though, as the framework to help the teacher who is teaching Te Reo Māori as a subject to look at what they could be aiming for in terms of their learning with their children. So it's exciting, and you know, I think there were lots of good things happening. Well, I think I runga I tēnā, one more thing. Assessment. Now, people were really worried when the minister said that we were going to develop these learning outcomes for each level of schooling, and we were going to have all these tests. And people thought we were going to have standardised tests like in England, because that's what happened. They had so many tests that the system crumbled under all the tests. And the issue of the tests not being appropriate for minority learners was raised, and we've told the minister that the whole issue of making our kids sit tests at each level to see whether they've got there is just not appropriate. So we've shifted well away from that now, and we're saying that we've got to develop item banks. Item banks are like diagnostic examples of whether the kids are doing well or not. And the teachers will be contracted to develop those item banks for each of those subjects. And so what we're not doing is looking at giving kids standardised tests to rank them against each other, but we're hoping to produce these assessment banks which will help the teachers see how well the child is doing and identifying what the kid needs to be able to move on to the next step. And teachers will be responsible. So this has a big implication for us Māori teachers who are working in schools to help look at the development, or don't feel whakamā to, when these contracts come up and you're working in schools, to maybe look at collectively trying to get together to look at developing some of these item banks, because here's an opportunity, because we'll be saying in the criteria for the contracts of these things, listen, you know, these have to be appropriate for a range of kids in schools. And up until now, a lot of the assessment has worked against our kids. And so teachers have got to learn a lot more about looking at the way in which they deliver the curriculum. It has all sorts of implications that, you know, the idea of doing things the way you did it before, you might have to start rethinking. Because if you have children who are at different levels of schooling, let's say at secondary school or even at primary school teachers are good at handling a range of children. Secondary school teachers aren't. And if you're looking at a range of levels within, say, a class, it has all sorts of implications of whether you just have Form 3 here or Form 4, or whether you have them together, or you look at units of work, or whether your day changes and goes to 4 o'clock. I mean, there are all sorts of things that schools are starting to think of different ways of handling, you know, the delivery of a curriculum, which is slightly different. So I think I should stop it there. Have you got any questions? Kia ora.
I was just a little bit concerned when you mentioned the graduates of the Kohanga Reo and how the aims and achievement levels will be based on Kohanga Reo graduates. What happens when our mokopuna who hasn't had the opportunity to go to Kohanga Reo, will they be based in the same as Kohanga, so therefore they start at a lower level?
You know, we've at the moment got a Māori's, that's what I was talking about, we've got two different issues here. We've got Māori, which is taught as a subject, right? So there's no problem with that, because a lot of schools will always continue to teach Māori as a subject. And there's a primary school syllabus, which is great, which has been put out, and it's terrific. And if you are a primary school teacher and you want some help devise programs. You should get that primary school syllabus if you have no other help. If you don't have people around you, because they have produced heaps of tapes and things to help the teachers pronounce words, and it's been a well thought out, you know, primary syllabus for teaching Māori as a subject. It works up to teaching Māori, you know, more fluently, but it's very good for the beginner. Whether I think you're at primary school or secondary school, if you want some help, I think it would pay. And each school got a copy of that for nothing, so it's not like there's been a massive outlay. In many schools, they're thrown away in a cupboard somewhere. I mean, they're just lying there. Nobody is really doing, I mean, you want to question your own schools to see whether, in fact, you know, has it moved out of the cardboard box that it arrived in, and is it still sitting in the chairman's office or somebody's office?
When was the syllabus issued?
Last year and this year. They've been putting out a series of booklets and things to support it. And so the stuff is there, and the RTMs, the Māori advisors and RTMs have been going and working with schools who make a commitment, who are serious about doing this. Because the reality is that many schools are expecting the Māori and itinerant teachers of Māori and Māori advisors to go in and teach their hour program for the week. And many of them are getting hoha with going along to support schools where there really isn't a real commitment. So, you know, that the commitment has to be seen to be a projected plan of development, and that there is some commitment from teachers. So, getting back to your point, there is a Māori language primary school syllabus, Te Hei Māori Pua, Māori Ora. Māori Ora. Which is there, but we've got the other issue of kids who are coming through. We've got, I can't remember, 10,000 children in Kohanga Reo, or might be a few more now. Now we've got to look at the reality that that syllabus, which talks about teaching Māori as a subject, is not appropriate. Now we've got to look at what they need is what's happening, like for the English syllabus, where you look at taking it for granted that those kids can speak Māori, and what then are our expectations of what they can say in Māori at each level of schooling. Because their whole curriculum is developed, their science is delivered through Māori, their maths, everything. So it's not to say that one is better than the other, it's to say that we've got something that's complementary happening at the moment. If you look in terms of economics, it's a hell of a waste of good money, isn't it, if you don't provide for them and to continue their schooling through that area.
It's only just begun to happen, hasn't it? We're just at that stage. Now the next stage of the Hangareya has to be attended to.
Well, we've got children now moving through to secondary, just about to go to secondary school, and I mean, this is the reality, is that we have been slow to provide for those children.
Yeah, just on that with the Kohanga Reo, one of the things I'm finding now is that a lot of our younger Catholic Māori parents will not send their children to Catholic schools. They cannot provide the ongoing education of their children in the reo. And that's something that we as Catholics have really to address. The other sad part about it is that in certain Catholic education authority levels, the whole question of te reo Māori is still a non-issue. In fact, we get into the argument of whether they're Catholics or Māoris, and they have to make a decision as to whether they are Catholic or Māori. And that was part of my whole thing on Sunday night. That we can't afford to look at it as if we're two different people. If we're going to be Catholic and Māori, then let's be both. And so
Thanks were given to Roimata after a period of question time. You will have questions of your own regarding the national curriculum, and it is strongly recommended that you contact your district office of the Ministry of Education or the local Education Advisory Service.